Hello, boneheads, and hello to everyone seeing me for the first time. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Ryan Howard. I'm a gamer, a southerner, an aspiring RPG designer, and a distant relative of Robert E. Howard. On my main show, Rollin' Bones with Ryan Howard, I interview creators in the RPG world and get their thoughts on various gaming topics. I don't like to take a lot of time on that show to discuss my thoughts on those topics in detail, though. I prefer to give that time to my guests. So rather than force my guests to listen to me rant, I want to put that spotlight on them on Rollin' Bones and use videos like this to give my thoughts on those particular topics that we're talking about. So today's topic is going to be kind of an introduction to role-playing games and what I think is important in the form of 12 rules for playing RPGs. So whether you are a first-time gamer looking to find out how to navigate this world of RPGs, or you're an old-timer, you've been around the block a few times and you're just curious what I have to say, I think you'll get something out of this. So these are Ryan Howard's 12 rules for role-playing games, or how to play like a bonehead. Rule number 1, role-playing game is a compound word. There's a lot of controversy over what's more important in RPGs, the rules or the roleplay. There are arguments to be made for both sides, and honestly, you can see different games emphasizing different aspects over others. You'll have things like, Burning Wheel or Fate or Powered by the Apocalypse definitely putting more emphasis on the roleplay, and then you'll have things that are closer to war games putting more emphasis on the game. Fact of the matter is, both are extremely important in what we call role-playing games. That's why both words are in the title. The rules exist to provide a structure, a limit on what can and cannot happen, and to provide some way to interface with this world that the GM has set up for the players. Roleplay is the means by which the players interact with that world. So you have to have the structure, but you also have to have the means to interact with the world around you. Otherwise, you might as well be playing either a war game or a board game if you want to focus exclusively on the rules, or you might as well be doing community theater or an improv class if you want to focus exclusively on the roleplay. Either way, you are missing an aspect of role-playing games, and so that's why it's important to emphasize that role-playing game is a compound word, because both elements are important. Rule number 2, the game master sets the pieces and the players move them. Now what this means is that on the front end, before the game even starts, the GM does the work of setting up all of the things that the players can interact with. Usually this involves drawing up a map, creating random encounter tables, and even setting up some elements of story that players can run into as they're exploring. But once that prep is done, the GM then opens the doors to the players and acts as an impartial referee. So basically at that point, the onus is on the players to explore the world that the GM has set up for them. That is the best way that I've found to, get people playing. It's not relying on the GM to constantly be an entertainer or a storyteller. The GM isn't trying to railroad players into a novel-like plot. Basically, the GM sets up a world, the world is set in motion, the players interact with it, and then the GM reacts to what the players are doing. That is honestly the best way to keep everyone happy at the table. The players feel like what they're doing matters, and the GM doesn't feel like he's constantly having to keep up with all the different crazy things the players think of wanting to do. Rule number 3, the best games challenge the players, not their character sheet. Now, a lot of modern games will have the solutions to problems be very apparent in the wizard spell list or the player's list of skills, whereas a lot of old school games give you very limited options as far as the skills in your character sheet, and basically tell you to apply them to the obstacles that you encounter. And I feel like the latter is the better way to actually go about doing things. You want to challenge the players' minds rather than just challenge them to know what everything on their character sheet does. That's important, but what's more important is that the players are able to think creatively and use the skills in front of them to overcome the obstacles around them. And that's why early game is often so deadly. It's designed that way on purpose so that players learn how to play. They learn how to make good decisions. They learn how to analyze situations tactically before they dive headlong into the fray. That's why early game is often so deadly, especially in old school games. It's there to teach players how to play. And once they move beyond that, they start to develop the skills, the muscle memory to solve these problems creatively using their brains, not just what's written on their character sheet. Rule number 4, restrictions and limitations enhance the game. Class, race, and rule limitations flesh out settings and allow for unique play experiences. If you accept these limitations as the given circumstances of a campaign, then you're off to a good start and you're really putting your head in the space of the campaign the way that the GM intended. If you take issue with these and try to push back on them, you're already doing a disservice to your fellow players and your GM who took the time to build this world out. If you don't like certain restrictions, maybe say you wanted to play a certain race or class that's not available in this campaign, either you need to get over it and play one of the options that's been given to you by your GM, or you need to find another table where that sort of thing is allowed. Those are really your only options. You shouldn't push back so hard on limitations. You should embrace them as a circumstance to be creative within. Rule 5, know the rules of the game you're playing. I have several friends that have gotten into some very serious arguments on Twitter and elsewhere. Most notably Crossface, shout out to Crossface, has had a lot of scrapes over this one, but honestly, he's right. You need to know the rules of the game that you're playing before you set out to start playing the game. You know, as a player, you need to know your class. You need to know the rules that are important to the character that you're playing. And as a GM, you need to be kind of broadly familiar with everything in the book. You have to not necessarily have all the rules memorized, but you need to know at the very least where to find them in the book. Rule number 5, know the rules of the game you're playing. Be familiar with the rules that are important to your class as a player, and then be familiar with all of the rules as a GM. You want to look for solutions to any problems that come up within the existing rules before you start pulling things from other systems or other games or making up house rules to implement on top of them, because ultimately what you're going to end up doing is breaking the game as it exists and having to continuously house rule just to reinforce the first rule that you broke. And it's not a good way to continue playing. At some point, you're not even playing the game that you set out to play. You're just kind of playing your own made-up system. And if you want to do that, that's fine, but you need to codify those rules and be consistent with them instead of just going on, oh, I rule this way in this circumstance, I rule this way in this circumstance. It's about consistency. Rule number 6, be learned in a handful of different games and systems. You need to read and play as many systems as you possibly can. This is the only way you're going to start to learn what systems you like, what systems you don't like, and get a feel for what systems are going to capture the kinds of games that you want to run and play in. So what this means is you need to take advantage of free resources that are out there. A lot of games these days are offering free quick start rules, or some kind of preview, or some kind of beginner's guide, usually in a digital form on their website that's generally either free or very, very inexpensive. So if you're curious about something like Dungeon Crawl Classics or Castles and Crusades or 5th edition D&D, go find the cheapest resource you can to start reading up on those rules. Another good way to get a bunch of rule books is through Humble Bundle, or to wait for some kind of sale through Drive-Thru RPG or something like that. Even on a publisher's website, they might be running sales every now and then. So just be on the lookout for, if there's a game you're curious about, that you've heard a lot of people talking about, that you want to get your hands on, wait for a sale and then, take advantage of that opportunity. You might swing and miss on a couple of these. You might find that you spent money on a system you're not really that into. But if you waited for a sale, it's not going to be nearly as much money as it could have been. So just take that advice for what it is. Now, another good way to get to know a bunch of games is to go to game stores or conventions and actually play these games. Conventions are a great way to get in a whole bunch of games that you might otherwise not get to play. One of my favorites to go to every year is North Texas RPG Convention. I've gotten to play a lot of games that I wouldn't otherwise have gotten to play just by going to that convention and either sitting in on a pickup game or signing up for stuff in advance. It really does behoove you to go to conventions and see what all is out there, try as many different games as you can. And if you can't make a convention, another good way to do the same thing is to jump into an online RPG community and start looking for games for these systems you're interested in. Say you really want to try out Ascendant or Savage Worlds. You just, jump into someone's Discord server or a Guilded server, go to a message board, just find a bunch of people who are looking for players and see if you can jump in on a handful of games. If you stay siloed in one specific game or one specific game system, you're really going to end up burning yourself out, especially if you start trying to hack that system into being something it's not. You see this a lot with 5th edition. There's a lot of people who want to run every single thing in 5e, and honestly, 5e is not built for that. But that's getting a little bit into rule number 7. So, rule number 7, play the game that best captures your fantasy. So, much like reading and playing a whole bunch of RPG systems, this is a process of trial and error. You're gonna end up playing in games that you don't really care for. I've done it. The longest tenured veterans out there have done it. Everyone's been involved in an RPG that they just didn't click with, and that is totally fine. If you read a bunch of games and you play a bunch of games, you'll be able to pretty quickly identify what will and will not work for the type of game, the genre of game, the tone of game that you want to run. And this is something that's going to end up being an entire video on its own down the line. So we'll come back to this topic a couple times. But for now, just know that you want to find the game that's going to give you and your friends the most amount of fun and really capture the fantasy that you're trying to accomplish in playing the game. So to do that, you have to read games, you have to play games. So rule number 6 and number 7, they go together like peanut butter and jelly. Rule number 8, commit to your games. Now, barring any kind of real-world emergencies or special events, if you agree to be in an RPG, you need to be at every session and you need to be on time. Now, I know, like I said, emergencies, special events, things come up. We all have busy schedules, that's fine. But if you can control whether or not you're able to make it to a session, you need to be at that session because you have committed to being in this game. Other people are setting aside time to play in this game. Your GM is setting aside prep time even before the session starts to make this game happen. So if you're consistently flaking out on them, a lot of GMs will just say, all right, we're not playing tonight, we don't have everyone. And then people who really want to play get frustrated because you flaked out. If you're not going to be there 9 times out of 10, again, just find a game that works better with your schedule. And also, during game time, you need to be focused exclusively on the game. Don't focus on your phone, don't be on social media, don't be randomly flipping through the book unless you're looking for something that's pertinent to your turn or circumstances that you're finding yourself in. You have to be focused on the game itself, because if you aren't, and then your turn comes up, we then have to wait for you to get back into the right headspace so that we can all continue playing. You need to commit your attention and your time to a game, otherwise a game's going to fall apart or people are going to get mad at you. Rule number 9, leave the real world behind. This is something that I feel like should be a no-brainer, but for some reason it's a struggle for a lot of people. So, don't bring real-world politics or real-world religion or anything divisive into your games. You're just going to make for a miserable experience. And even kind of setting politics and religion and those things aside, don't bring interpersonal drama into the game. If you're having a bad day, just tell everyone beforehand, hey guys, I'm having kind of a bad day, so if I'm a little off, that's why, and then let that be the end of it. Don't bite someone's head off because of something that's happening at home or at the office or wherever. Just as best you can, separate yourself from all of the crap that's going on in the real world and just take a few minutes to have some fun with your friends, because that's what we're here to do. Life is hard enough. The real world is very difficult, and there's a lot of stuff to be mad about right now. Leave that behind for a few hours while we're rolling dice and playing this fantasy game. If you want to talk about politics or religion or, have those conversations in a civil manner, do so outside of game time. Don't do it during, don't do it before, don't do it immediately after. Have that on your own time, and then don't let it affect what happens at the table. Rule number 10, RPGs are not therapy sessions. It is not reasonable to expect your GM or fellow players to be aware of every single hot button topic that you might have. If they're so bothersome to you, you need to either let people know in advance or just keep it to yourself, or, find another group. There are some gritty, rough, and disgusting things that can come up over the course of a role-playing game, depending, again, on the genre and tone that you guys have established. So if you're playing a dark fantasy game, it's reasonable to expect some dark fantasy elements in there. I'm not going to go into detail, but if you're playing a game that's similar to Berserk, you can expect that there's going to be some difficult things to swallow in that game. Anyone who has read Berserk knows what I'm talking about. Anyone who hasn't, go read Berserk. It's really good, and you'll also know what I'm talking about here. But these things are important and necessary in that particular genre. If you've agreed to play a dark fantasy game or, kind of a gritty, realistic game, you've agreed to all of the trappings of that genre. Some of it will shock you, some of it might disturb you a little bit, but that's all part of the game you agreed to play. If you're uncomfortable with that, don't agree to play the game. If you're not able to separate the reality from the role-playing game, then honestly, the hobby as a whole is not for you. I hate to be that harsh, but you have to be able to keep the RPG in the RPG and the real world in the real world, and never the twain shall meet. You have to be aware that things that happen in the game are not being done to real people. It's just part of, again, establishing the tone, establishing the narrative, establishing the circumstances for your characters to be heroic within. If you can't get past that, you shouldn't be playing role-playing games at all. Rule number 11. Players should be respectful of each other. Respect your fellow players' time by knowing your character, knowing the rules, and paying attention during combat, during initiative, knowing what you're going to do as, a reaction to what the other players at the table will be doing. You have to respect your fellow players as people. Don't cause problems inside the game or outside the game. Don't antagonize someone over Twitter or, text them a bunch of things that make them mad and then show up at the game and wonder why they aren't getting along with you. You also need to not act like you're the most important person at the table, and don't presume that a majority of the people at the table side with you, especially if you are derailing the game. I've been in several circumstances where a player thought they were being amusing, but all they were doing was making other players mad because they were taking up 30 minutes of 3 hours of role-playing. Just be respectful of each other as players. Respect the game master's time and the preparation that they put in. Respect the players that have taken the time to get to know their characters, to get to know the rules, that know what they're going to do on their turn. And you in turn should learn the rules for your character, learn what you can and cannot do, and pay attention during the game so that you know what is and is not appropriate to do in certain situations. And rule number 12, be willing to teach and be willing to learn. So, new players, it behooves you to listen to older players and learn from their experiences, especially players who've been playing for 15 years or more. They've played a lot of games, they have had a lot of characters die, they know the ropes, they know the ins and outs of how these RPGs work, and they will help you avoid making mistakes that you would otherwise make. Likewise, veterans, be patient with new players. Remember that you at one point were a brand new player. You had never heard of a player's handbook or a boule or a beholder or a vorpal sword. There was a time before. Put yourself back in those shoes and remember what you would have felt if someone had come alongside you, or if someone did come alongside you and show you how these things work, what they mean, and how to have fun playing this game. You should offer that same service, or offer that service if it wasn't offered to you, to these new players. Help turn curious newbies into lifelong players and GMs especially. So those are my 12 rules for role-playing. What do you guys think? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, if you agree, if you disagree, or if you have rules that you would like to add to this list. Be sure to like, subscribe, comment, hit that notification bell, and tell everyone that Rollin' Bones is out here for everyone who is interested in role-playing games. I've got these videos where I do deep dives into topics. I've got the show every Tuesday at 8 p.m. Central live right here on YouTube, where I am interviewing guests about various RPG topics. So the best way to find out when all of that is happening, like I said, is to subscribe and hit that bell notification. That way you'll know when a new video's up or when I am live. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed this, and until next time, whether you rolled a 1 or a 20, I am so glad that you rolled your bones with me, Ryan Howard, and I'll see you on the other side.